torn between two worlds, half Apache, half white, and lost. Asterisk, the rain fell hard, fast, and cold like it had something to prove. Wind pushed through the trees, heavy clouds rolled low, and the dirt turned to thick, heavy mud. There, in the middle of it all, lay a girl still soaked through. Her eyes were open, but she didn't move. Her lips were cracked, hands frozen. She was breathing barely. No one knew her name. No one had ever waited for her to come home. She was born into silence, half Apache, half white, and nowhere to belong. The sound of hooves was the first thing she heard, faint at first, then louder, closer. She didn't lift her head, didn't want to, but part of her listened. A man's voice came next, not loud, not soft, just real. You alive? She didn't answer, didn't even blink. The man knelt beside her, stared for a second, then let out a sigh. Damn fool, he muttered. You'll freeze out here. He didn't ask questions. He just picked her up like it was the only thing left to do. Warmth came slow. She woke to it first, the smell of smoke, then the soft knock of rain on a tin roof. The room was small, wooden, old. The fire cracked inside a stove nearby. Her dress, muddy and wet, hung over a chair. A rough wool blanket was pulled over her. She blinked a few times, not sure if this was a dream or something worse. The door creaked. The man stepped in. Older, maybe 40. Rough hands, lined face, stubble across. His chin, his voice matched his boots, quiet but solid. You're awake, he said, setting a tin mug beside her bed. Coffee, not strong, but it's hot. She didn't take it. Just stared at the mug. I'm not gonna hurt you, he added. If I meant to, I'd have left you in the dirt. Still, she said nothing. But her hands moved slow, shaky, reaching. For the cup, it was warm. The metal stung her fingers, but she held it like it might disappear. Took a sip, harsh, burnt, real. The warmth spread slow across her chest. It wasn't comfort, but it was something. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. Later, she watched him through the small window. He was out by the corral working with a horse. The animal twitched and paced, ready to run. He didn't pull, didn't yell, just held the rope and braved slow. He never looked around to see if she was watching. She didn't need to. He was calm, sure, and still. Like the kind of person who knew storms came and storms went. That evening, she asked her first question. Quiet, barely there. Why? He was stoking the fire. Paused. Why what? Why didn't you turn me in? He leaned back, wiped his hands on a cloth. You think they'd have done better? She looked down. Most folks don't keep people like me around. Most folks talk a lot about justice, he said. Usually means they want revenge. He told her he had a brother, said he was killed in a raid years ago. I hated your people, he said. Didn't even care if you were just a kid. Hate's easy, it sticks, but it eats you from the inside. She didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything. That night, she lay awake under the wool blanket. The stove crackled. No prayers, no orders. Just fire and rain and silence. But this silence, it didn't feel empty, it felt full. Full of things that didn't need words. Full of space she didn't have to earn. When morning came, she sat up without fear. Her body was sore, but something inside her felt ... steady. She picked up the cup of coffee again. Cold now, still bitter, still real. She didn't know where she'd go. Didn't know what he'd say next. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she had to run. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start. Asterisk, the next few mornings passed slow. The days stretched wide, open, and wordless. Juny didn't ask to stay. He didn't ask her to leave. They just shared the same space like two shadows that had learned not to bump into each other. She swept the floor with stiff arms, dragged in. Wood with shaking legs, moved like someone who wasn't sure if she was allowed, but kept doing it anyway. Not because she owed him, not because he expected it. But because doing something felt better than waiting, he didn't stop her. He didn't thank her either. He just let her. Sometimes she found herself watching him, not curious exactly, just dot, trying to understand. The way he moved like the world didn't owe him anything. The way he hummed under his breath while fixing tack. Not songs, just sounds, the kind that keep a person steady. Like a fence line after a storm, he never filled the silence with questions. Not once asked where she was from or what she was running. He didn't pretend to know her story, and that oddly made her feel safer than any place she'd ever been. Because not being asked gave her space. And space was something she'd never had. She started noticing small things. He always made 2 plates at dinner. Never said why. Never pointed. Just set them down. One for him. One for her. He didn't tell her she could stay, but he didn't make her leave either. That quiet act unchanging was more comfort than any promise she'd ever been given. One afternoon, she stepped outside barefoot. The earth was dry but soft. She stood there for a while, feeling the dirt beneath her toes, the way the wind brushed her face. There was no voice behind her telling her to hurry, no bell ringing to push her back inside. No hands grabbing her shoulders and turning her into something she wasn't. Just air. Just ground. When she looked up, she saw him at the edge of the fence. The same restless horse from before standing near him. This time she watched closer. He didn't use a whip, didn't raise his voice, just stood there, still as a tree. Rope in hand, breath slow and even. The horse shifted, ears twitching, legs tense. But he didn't move. He just let the animal get used to the quiet, to the idea that not every hand was there to hurt. Juny stood at the door, arms crossed tight, watching them both. That horse reminded her of herself, jumpy, waiting for a fight, expecting to be pushed, pulled, broken, but he didn't do that. And for the first time, she really wondered what kind of man he was. That evening, he brought her something wrapped in old cloth, set it on the table, didn't look at her when he said, "This used to belong to my wife. She passed a while back. If you want it, fine. If not, leave it." He didn't wait for a reply. Just walked outside and closed the door behind him. Juny stood there for a long time before touching the bundle. Her fingers were slow, careful. Inside was a blouse, pale green, and a long faded skirt, both worn but clean. They smelled of wood smoke and quiet memories. She didn't cry, but her chest ached in that way when something real touches a part of you that's been numb too long. She held the fabric close, not because it was pretty or new, but because it was offered without pity, without debt. Later that night, she put them on. The blouse hung loose, the skirt fell heavy around her legs. It felt strange, like walking in someone else's skin. But she didn't take it off. She looked in the mirror not to admire, just to see. Her reflection stared back, tired, thin, still healing, but for once not invisible. When he came back in, she was at the stove, stirring the pot he'd left simmering. He paused at the doorway, looked once, then nodded just a little and sat down. No words, just warmth in the room, the kind that didn't need to be named. Later, as they ate, the silence sat between them again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It wasn't a wall. It was something else. Like a blanket you pull over yourself on a cold night. Not loud, not soft. Just there. She still didn't know if this was a place she could stay, but she knew this much. The silence no longer scared her. And that meant something had already changed. The days passed quiet, like the house itself breathed slower when no one filled it with noise. Juny had stopped watching the door like it might open the wrong way. Her hands still trembled sometimes, when lifting a bucket, when lighting the fire, but not from fear. From remembering. Every morning, she woke before the sun, not to escape, just because her body had learned to survive that way. She tied her hair back with a strip of cloth and stepped outside. The wind carried dust across the yard. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out and disappeared into the blue. Clint was already by the barn. fixing something with his hands. She walked past him without a word, picked up the broom and started sweeping the porch. He glanced at her once. That was all. The kind of look that said, "All right then, you're here." She was learning the rhythms of the place, the creak, of the stove when it settled, the way the floor dipped near the back room, how the chickens liked to gather near the fence when it rained. She wasn't just passing through anymore. She was memorizing the place, piece by piece. That night, the air turned cooler. The stove crackled louder. Clint was fixing a belt on the saddle while Juny folded towels near the fire. Her hands moved, slow, careful, like each fold held something more than cloth. She looked over and said it before she could talk herself out of it. "I had a name once," she said. He didn't stop working, just looked at her steady. "They gave it to me at the mission school, said it was cleaner, easier to say. But it never felt like mine." Clint nodded. "What was it?" "Doesn't matter, it wasn't real." He didn't ask what her real name was, didn't push. Just let the truth sit in the room like another person between them. She kept folding. The fire popped. The wind brushed against the windows. Then she said, "My mother was white. She died when I was born. My father, he was Apache. He left me at the mission. Sighed I could be saved." She paused, looked at the flames. Saved meant changed. She whispered, "They didn't want me to be whole, just quiet, just obedient." Clint leaned back in the chair. His eyes never left her face. "Did you believe them?" "I wanted to." Silence again, but this one wasn't cold. It was full, like water settling in a dry well. "I know what it's like," Clint said. "Being between things, not fitting anywhere." She looked at him then, really looked. "You?" He nodded. "I had a brother once. Strong, brave, we were different. As day and night, but he always had my back. He died in a raid. Wrong place, wrong time. I blamed everyone with your skin for a long time." She didn't flinch. She just sat with it. Let it be ugly. Let it be real. "I figured hate would keep me warm," he said, but all it did was rot the inside. They sat with that truth between them, like two people sharing the same scar but from opposite sides of the blade. "You're not afraid of me," she said softly. "No, I'm just listening." Something shifted in her chest. Not trust, not yet, but the door had cracked open. That night she dreamt again, but not of fire or running. She dreamed of a river wide, muddy, and calm. She was standing on one side and a small girl on the other. The girl looked like her, but younger. Dirt on her cheeks, wild hair, no shoes. They didn't speak. They just stared at each other until the water between them got quiet. When Juny woke, the fire in the stove had burned low. The sky outside was still dark. Clint's coat was folded over the back of the chair again. He did that sometimes. Said nothing about it. Just left it there. She wrapped it around herself and sat by the fire until it came back to life. Later, they sat at the table with warm bread and leftover beans. Juny said nothing for a long time. Then quietly, like she was letting go of a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying, she asked, "Do you think a person can choose who they are, even if no one else agrees?" Clint didn't blink. That's the only way it ever sticks. She nodded. Outside, the wind had slowed. The sun broke through thin clouds, laying soft gold across the field. And for the first time in her life, Juny didn't feel halfway anything. She just felt real. It started with a feeling. Juny was hauling a bucket of water from the well when the air shifted. Just a little. The breeze that morning felt different, not colder, but quieter, like the land was holding its breath. Like something was watching. Not with eyes, but with memory. She didn't say anything. Not to Clint, not even to herself. But she noticed. That evening, she found him sitting on the edge of the porch, sharpening a knife he hadn't used in months. Long, slow strokes. Not rushed, not nervous, just deliberate. The kind of movement people make when they're waiting for something they hope won't come. You feel it too, she said. He didn't look up. Just kept sliding the blade along the stone. Yeah, they didn't say what it was. They didn't have to. That night, Juny had the dream again. Fire this time. The mission burning. Screams in the distance. A girl following her. But this time there was a voice behind the flames. Low, steady, final. You were never meant to survive. She woke before dawn, damp with sweat. The fire in the stove had gone out. The house was cold again. But Clint's coat was there, folded by her boots. It was the kind of gesture that said, I don't have the words, but I know something's coming too. She didn't tell him about the dream. The next morning, Clint got the wagon ready. Said he had to make a trip into town for supplies and mail. Same as always. But this time, Juny didn't hesitate. I'm coming with you, she said. He looked at her, brow raised, not questioning her strength, but asking if she was ready to be seen. Really seen, she nodded. I'm not hiding anymore. The road to town was long and dusty. They rode side by side, no talk. Just the steady creak of the wagon wheels and the soft clop of the horse's hooves. Juny held onto the bench seat, her eyes scanning the land as it rolled past wide fields, bare trees, long shadows. The wind moved across it all like it remembered things she didn't want to. The town came into view slowly. A few buildings, a faded church, the smell of smoke, and iron from the blacksmith. No one spoke when they arrived. But everyone noticed a woman walking with a basket paused mid-step. A man behind a horse trough rose with his hand on the bridle. Children were pulled gently behind doors. Clint stopped the wagon in front of the general store. He stepped down, then turned and held out his hand. Juny looked at it, then took it, steady, not proud. Just sure. Inside the store, it was cooler, darker. The old man behind the counter, Dorsey, squinted at her like he couldn't decide what part of her to see first. She helps at the ranch, Clint said simply, laying the order slip on the counter. Dorsey hesitated, eyes darting between them. Juny stepped forward, voice calm. I don't belong to anyone, but I pull my weight. The old man nodded once and disappeared to the back without a word. While they waited, Juny walked the length of the store, trailing her fingers along the counter. Her hand passed over carvings in the wood initials, hearts, old dates, pieces of other people's stories. Stories she'd never been invited into. Just then, a small girl approached. Freckled, barefoot, no older than 6. She held out a yellow flower, half wilted, but still bright. This is for you, she said softly. Juny knelt down, took it with both hands. Thank you. The girl smiled and ran off before Juny could say more. When she stood, Clint was watching her. Not with pride, not with surprise, just something softer, quieter. Like maybe he was learning her too. Someone still remembers how to be kind, he said. Juny smiled just barely. It wasn't much, but it was real. They left town with a full wagon and more eyes on their backs than they'd like. But Juny didn't look down. She didn't rush. And when they reached the edge of the road and the land opened up again, she let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That night, rain came again. Not angry, not fast, just steady. The kind that sinks into the soil and stays. There, Juny stood barefoot on the porch in the old green dress that once belonged to a woman she'd never met. The fabric clung to her skin. The wind wrapped around her like a second coat, but she didn't move. She didn't flinch. Clint came and stood beside her. Quiet, no words. They'll catch cold, he muttered. I don't think death waits on the weather, she said. He didn't argue, just pulled off his coat and laid it on her shoulders. I'm not trying to prove anything, she added. I know. They stood side by side, letting the rain fall on them both. And in that silence, something else returned. Not fear, not pain, just choice. And this time she wasn't running from it. The next morning smelled like wet dirt and iron. The storm had passed, but the land still held its memory-soft patches across the field, puddles shining like old coins. Juny woke to the sound of Clint's splitting kindling. Steady, clean strikes. The kind of rhythm a man gets used to when he doesn't have anyone to talk to but the sky. She dressed slow. No hurry, just have it. Shirt tucked in, boots laced tight, hair pulled back with a strip of leather. When she stepped outside, Clint didn't say anything. Just handed her the feed bucket. They worked in silence like always. But today, the silence felt different, not cautious, not heavy, just shared dot as they scattered grain for the chickens. Clint nodded toward the back of the property. Got something I want to show you, he said. Juny followed him past the barn, past the patch of wildflowers she had planted without asking. Her boots sank a little into the damp ground. They stopped at a small clearing where the grass had been flattened and the earth looked just a little darker. Used to think about putting a shed here, Clint said. Never got around to it. Juny looked at the dirt. At the simple wooden stake in the ground. No sign, no markings. Just space. Why? Show me this? She asked. He shrugged. Figured maybe you want to build something. Not from what was, from what you see now. She didn't answer right away. Just stared at the open land, wind pulling at her sleeves. Then, finally, I want to build something that's strong, but still alive. Clint gave a small nod. Sounds like you already know where to start. That evening, she found a bundle by the porch bench folded neatly. Inside was a plain linen shirt and a pair of soft, worn trousers. Not lace, not frills, no story attached. Just clothes. She ran her fingers across the fabric. It didn't feel borrowed. It felt possible. Clint appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. Thought maybe it's time you had something that's just yours. She didn't say thank you. Not because she wasn't grateful, but because some things don't need to be said out loud. Later, after dinner, Juny stood near the stove drying her hands. You always keep a second mug ready, she said. Clint didn't look up from the table. Only since you've been here. That night, she didn't sleep right away. Her mind was still, not anxious, just full. She watched the fire burn down low, the embers pulsing like a slow, steady heart. The quiet no longer felt like something pressing on her chest. It felt like breathing. She whispered into the dark, just to say it out loud. I'm tired of being a shadow. In the morning, his coat was folded at the end of her bed. Next to it, a piece of bread and a warm mug of tea. That day, when Clint mentioned heading back to town, she didn't ask. She just stood, tied her boots, and got in the wagon. The town was just as it had been, dusty, plain, cautious. But something in Juny had changed. She didn't feel smaller. She didn't feel like she had to shrink herself to fit between the looks. They pulled in slow. Same buildings, same faces. The difference wasn't in them, it was in her. People saw. Her, she felt their eyes. A man by the smithy stood still with a hammer raised mid-swing. A woman with a child stepped aside. No one said anything, but their silence was sharp. Clint tied the horse, walked around to help her down. She didn't need it, but she took his hand anyway, not for support. For steadiness, inside the store, Mr. Dorsey didn't even greet them. Just blinked hard like he hadn't expected her to return. Clint placed the order slip on the counter. We'll take the usual. Dorsey glanced at Juny. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. I don't belong to anyone, Juny said, her voice calm and even. But I work hard, and I don't owe anyone an apology for standing here. Her words didn't shake. She didn't raise her voice, but they landed like weight on the floor solid. Dorsey blinked once, then nodded. All right. While he disappeared to the back, Juny wandered through the store. Her hand brushed across the old wood. She paused at the counter where someone had carved their initials years ago. Maybe young lovers. Maybe someone who wanted to be remembered. That's when a small voice said, "This is for you." Juny turned. A little girl with sunburned cheeks and bare feet held out a tiny flower. A wild one. Yellow with thin petals and a bent stem. Juny knelt down and took it gently. Thank you. The girl smiled and ran off. When Juny turned around, Clint was watching her. His eyes soft, quiet. Guess someone still remembers how to be decent, he said. Juny smiled, not because it changed everything, but because it meant something had started. They left town with a full wagon. The road home felt different, not shorter, just lighter. Asterisk, the next few days passed like the wind, soft, steady, and unnoticed until you stopped to feel it. Something had shifted in Juny, but it wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of change you announce. It was the kind that builds inside your ribs and spreads across your shoulders without anyone telling you it's happening. She woke with the sun, not from fear, not from habit, but because she wanted to. The land outside was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned. Clint was already up most mornings, feeding the animals or hammering something on the porch. He never told her what to do. She just stepped into the day like she'd always been part of it. One morning, he nodded toward the edge of the barn. Could use some help fixing that fence? She didn't answer. Just rolled up her sleeves and walked beside him. They worked. Without much talking, passing nails, lifting wood, steady hands holding weathered boards in place. There was no instruction, just rhythm. That evening, as the light stretched across the hills, she saw something on the porch bench again. A bundle, like before. But this time, inside was something different. A folded linen shirt and trousers, not stitched with history, not worn with someone else's grief. Just new, plain, meant to be worn, not remembered. She touched the fabric and looked toward the doorway. Clint was standing there with his arms crossed. I figured maybe it's time you had something that didn't come with someone else's story, he said. She nodded once. No smile, just quiet gratitude. Later, she stood at the wash basin, changing into the clothes. The linen was light, clean, and unfamiliar, but not uncomfortable. It didn't feel like hiding. It felt like becoming. She caught her reflection in the mirror above the basin. For the first time, she didn't see pieces of other people stitched together. She just saw herself. Clint was at the table when she came down, fixing the handle on a worn knife. She placed something beside him, a small, dusty box. I found this up in the attic, she said. He glanced down. The box was full of letters, old ones, stained with time, some still sealed, some torn open and read long ago. He didn't touch them. Just looked at the box for a long time. You kept them, she said. Yeah, but you don't read them. No. Why not? He exhaled slowly. Because I already know what they say. And knowing doesn't mean I have to live by it. She sat down across from him. The light from the stove flickered across the table. You could have thrown them out. I could have, he said, but I didn't. That's not weakness, she said quietly. No, he replied. It's just not running, but not going back either. They sat there for a long while, the fire soft behind them. Then Juny stood and pulled out a piece of paper, sat down again, and began to write. She didn't write to anyone. Not to the mission, not to the tribe, not to her father or her mother's ghost. She just wrote to herself. I wasn't made to be half of anything, not half wild, half tamed, not half saved, half lost. I'm not here to carry someone else's hope. My name is Juny, and it's not a question. It's a choice. She folded the paper, held it above the flame, watched it catch, curl, and burn clean, not out of anger, not out of grief, but because it was time. The next morning, the house didn't feel borrowed anymore. It breathed like she belonged in it. Clint said nothing, but there were 2 mugs on the table again. He poured the tea, slid one toward her. Juny didn't say much that day, but her steps were different, firmer. When she walked outside, the land didn't feel foreign beneath her boots. It felt lived in. People began showing up, not to question, not to stare, just to help. Dorsey dropped off some old leather, said maybe she'd want to make something of her own. Elma, the retired school teacher, brought dried fruit and a cactus in a clay pot. "It's time you had something that can bloom," she said. Even Jesse, a boy from the edge of town, helped her repaint the barn door. He didn't ask who she was. He just said, "This your place now?" Juny looked at the sky, then at the field. Maybe it is. Later that evening, she went to the garden she'd started behind the shed. Small rows, early sprouts. She knelt in the dirt, tying a thin strip of leather around the base of one plant. Clint walked up behind her, quiet as always. "What's that for?" he asked. She ran her fingers over the soil. "It's a marker." "For what?" She stood, brushed the dirt from her hands. "For me." He nodded, eyes on the fragile stem. "You think it'll make it?" She looked at the sky, at the land, at the roots below her own feet. "I think I will." The days didn't announce themselves anymore. They just arrived, soft and steady, like they knew they were welcome. Juny no longer counted how long she'd been there. She didn't measure time in weeks or seasons. She measured it in small things. The way the chickens trusted her now. The first bloom from the cactus Elma brought. The sound of Clint's boots on the porch at dusk. She'd stopped waiting for someone to knock on the door and ask who she was. Stopped wondering if the land would push her away. There were still moments when fear rose without warning, when a bird's sudden cry or a shadow near the fence made her heart jump, but it passed faster now, because she knew who she was waking up for. That morning, she found Clint by the chicken coop, tossing grain like he'd done 1,000 times. She joined him without a word, worked in rhythm beside him. When they finished, he nodded toward the tree near the back fence, the one she planted weeks ago. "Come with me," he said. They walked through the tall grass, past the garden beds she'd laid out with string and care. At the base of the tree, the soil was warm. The small stem had grown a few new leaves, thin but brave. Clint knelt beside it and cleared away a few weeds. "Used to think this land didn't have much left to give," he said, "but I was looking at it wrong. It just needed someone to believe in it again." Juny crouched next to him, brushing dirt from her palms. "That's what I thought too, about myself." They didn't speak for a while, just sat there, listening to the wind through the grass, to the life quietly building around them. That afternoon, she found a smooth wooden disc sitting on the windowsill. Carved into the center was a sun symbol, rough-edged, handmade. "It's not a tribal symbol," Clint said from behind her. "It's mine. I made it when I got back from the war. Didn't know what I was carving at the time. Just wanted something that felt true." She held it in her hand. "Not heavy, but solid. Real. I'd like you to have it," he added. "Not because of who you were, but because of who you are now." She didn't ask what he saw in her. She didn't need to. He'd never used big words, and that had always been enough. Later, she returned to the attic. Not for rope or tools, but for something forgotten. She pulled open the old box of Clint's letters, dozens of them untouched. Letters from the army, from churches, from people asking him to come back, asking him to explain himself, asking him to change. She brought the box downstairs and set it by the fire. "You ever think about answering any of them?" she asked. Clint looked over. His hands were still. "No, I already gave them all the explanation I'm willing to. I stayed. That's enough." She sat beside him. "You think that's what people like us have to do? Just stay quiet and survive?" Clint looked at her long, steady. "No, I think people like us just have to stop apologizing for being here." That night, she sat at the table with a blank sheet of paper. She didn't write a letter this time. She just wrote a single sentence. "This is mine." Then folded it, tucked it into the wooden disc, and slid it beneath her pillow like a promise. Weeks passed. The house no longer felt temporary. The people in town no longer looked at her like she was a visitor. They came by with tools, with seeds, with questions about their own fences. No one said, "You don't belong." They didn't have to. She was already proving it wrong, just by waking up every morning and showing up to live. One evening, Jesse, the boy who had helped with the barn, walked by the fence and saw her planting another row of beans. You really live here now? He asked. Juny paused, brushed her hands off on her skirt. I do, she said. For real this time. He nodded. Just figured. You look like you belong. She smiled, not big, not showy. Just honest. That night, she stood on the porch as the sun dropped low, painting the fields in gold. Clint stepped beside her, quiet as always. He didn't need to speak. His presence said enough. I never thought any of this could be mine, she whispered. The land, the quiet, even the name. Clint didn't look at her, just nodded. It always was, he said. You just had to believe it. She leaned her shoulder against his, not as a guest, not as a child needing rescue, but as someone who had finally chosen herself Juny, not the name they gave her at the mission, not the label strangers used. Not half this or half that dot, just Juny, and not even the rain could wash that away anymore.